according to both Taoism and Zen, the center of the mind's activity is not in the conscious thinking process, not in the ego. When a man has learned to let his mind alone so that it functions in the integrated and spontaneous way that is natural to it, he begins to show the special kind of virtue or power called te. This is not virtue in the current sense of moral rectitude, but in the older sense of effectiveness, as when one speaks of the healing virtues of a plant. Te is furthermore unaffected or spontaneous virtue, which cannot be cultivated or imitated by any deliberate method. In sum, then, te is the unthinkable ingenuity and creative power of man's spontaneous and natural functioning, a power which is blocked when one tries to master it in terms of formal methods and techniques. It is like the centipede's skill in using 100 legs at once. The centipede was happy quite until a toad in fun said, "Pray, which leg goes after which?" This worked his mind to such a pitch, he lay distracted in a ditch, considering how to run. In other schools of Buddhism, awakening seems remote and almost superhuman, something to be reached only after many lives of patient effort. But in Zen, there is always the feeling that awakening is something quite natural, something startlingly obvious, which may occur at any moment. If it involves a difficulty, it is just that it is much too simple. The opening words of the oldest Zen poem say that the perfect way, Tao, is without difficulty, save that it avoids picking and choosing. Only when you stop liking and disliking will all be clearly understood. A split hair's difference and heaven and earth are set apart. If you want to get the plain truth, be not concerned with right and wrong. The conflict between right and wrong is the sickness of the mind. The point is not to make an effort to silence the feelings and cultivate bland indifference. It is to see through the universal illusion that what is pleasant or good may be wrested from what is painful or evil. To see this is to see that good without evil is like up without down, and that to make an ideal of pursuing the good is like trying to get rid of the left by turning constantly to the right. One is therefore compelled to go around in circles. Zen is a liberation from this pattern, and its apparently dismal starting point is to understand the absurdity of choosing, of the whole feeling that life may be significantly improved by a constant selection of the good. One must start by getting the feel of relativity, and by knowing that life is not a situation from which there is anything to be grasped or gained, as if it were something which one approaches from outside, like a pie or a barrel of beer. To succeed is always to fail, in the sense that the more one succeeds in anything, the greater is the need to go on succeeding. To eat is to survive, to be hungry. The illusion of significant improvement arises in moments of contrast, as when one turns from the left to the right on a hard bed. The position is better so long as the contrast remains, but before long the second position begins to feel like the first, so one acquires a more comfortable bed and, for a while, sleeps in peace. But the solution of the problem leaves a strange vacuum in one's consciousness, a vacuum soon filled by the sensation of another intolerable contrast, hitherto unnoticed, and just as urgent, just as frustrating as the problem of the hard bed. Zen does not take the attitude that it is so futile to eat when hungry that one may as well starve, nor is it so inhuman as to say that when we itch, we should not scratch. Disillusionment with the pursuit of the good does not involve the evil of stagnation as its necessary alternative, for the human situation is like that of fleas on a hot griddle. None of the alternatives offer a solution, for the flea who falls must jump, and the flea who jumps must fall. Human experience is determined as much by the nature of the mind and the structure of its senses as by the external objects whose presence the mind reveals. Men feel themselves to be victims or puppets of their experience because they separate themselves from their minds, thinking that the nature of the mind-body is something involuntarily thrust upon them. They think that they did not ask to be born, did not ask to be given a sensitive organism to be frustrated by alternating pleasure and pain. But Zen asks us to find out who it is that has the mind, and who it was that did not ask to be born before father and mother conceived us. When we are no longer identified with the idea of ourselves, the entire relationship between subject and object, knower and known, undergoes a sudden and revolutionary change. It becomes a real relationship, a mutuality in which the subject creates the object just as much as the object creates the subject. The knower no longer feels himself to be independent of the known, The experiencer no longer feels himself to stand apart from the experience. Consequently, the whole notion of getting something out of life, of seeking something from experience, becomes absurd. To put it in another way, it becomes vividly clear that in concrete fact, I have no other self than the totality of things of which I am aware. This is the Huayan doctrine of the net of jewels, of Shi Shi Wu Ai, in which every jewel contains the reflection of all the others. Man's identification with his idea of himself gives him a specious and precarious sense of permanence. For this idea is relatively fixed, being based upon carefully selected memories of his past, memories which have a preserved and fixed character. But to the degree that he identifies himself with the fixed idea, he becomes aware of life as something which flows past him, faster and faster as he grows older, as his idea becomes more rigid, more bolstered with memories. The more he attempts to clutch the world, the more he feels it as a process in motion. If we watch the shore while we are sailing in a boat, we feel that the shore is moving. But if we look nearer to the boat itself, we know then that it is the boat which moves. In confusion of body and mind, we often get the mistaken belief that our mind is constant. But if we actually practice Zen and come back to ourselves, we see that this was wrong. Dogen is here trying to express the strange sense of timeless moments, which arises when one is no longer trying to resist the flow of events. Peculiar stillness and the self-sufficiency of the succeeding instants, when the mind is, as it were, going along with them and not trying to arrest them. The measuring of worth and success in terms of time, and the insistent demand for assurances of a promising future make it impossible to live freely both in the present and in the promising future when it arrives. For there is never anything but the present, and if one cannot live there, one cannot live anywhere. The life of Zen begins, therefore, in a disillusion with the pursuit of goals which do not really exist. The good without the bad, the gratification of a self which is no more than an idea, and the morrow which never comes. For all these things are a deception of symbols pretending to be realities, and to seek after them is like walking straight into a wall upon which some painter has, by the convention of perspective, suggested an open passage. In short, Zen begins at the point where there is nothing further to seek, nothing to be gained. Zen is most emphatically not to be regarded as a system of self-improvement or a way of becoming a Buddha. In the words of Lin Chi, if a man seeks the Buddha, that man loses the Buddha. For all ideas of self-improvement and of becoming or getting something in the future relate solely to our abstract image of ourselves. To follow them is to give ever more reality to that image. On the other hand, our true non-conceptual self is already the Buddha and needs no improvement. In the course of time it may grow, but one does not blame an egg for not being a chicken. Still less does one criticize a pig for having a shorter neck than a giraffe. What is, therefore, to be gained from Zen is called Wu Shi, or nothing special. For as the Buddha says, I obtained not the least thing from unexcelled complete awakening, and for this very reason it is called unexcelled complete awakening. The difficulty of Zen is, of course, to shift one's attention from the abstract to the concrete, from the symbolic self to one's true nature. So long as we merely talk about it, so long as we turn over ideas in our minds about symbol and reality, or keep repeating, I am not my idea of myself, this is still mere abstraction. Zen created the method of direct pointing in order to escape from this vicious circle, in order to thrust the real immediately to our notice. When reading a difficult book, it is of no help to think, I should concentrate, for one thinks about concentration instead of what the book has to say. Likewise, in studying or practicing Zen, it is of no help to think about Zen. To remain caught up in ideas and words about Zen is, as the old masters say, to stink of Zen. For this reason, the masters talk about Zen as little as possible, and throw its concrete reality straight at us. This reality is the suchness of our natural non-verbal world. Another master was having tea with two of his students, when he suddenly tossed his fan to one of them, saying, "What's this?" The student opened it and fanned himself. "Not bad," says he. "Now you," he went on, passing it to the other student, who had once closed the fan and scratched his neck with it. This done, he opened it again, placed a piece of cake on it, and offered it to the master. This was considered even better, for when there are no names, the world is no longer classified in limits and bounds. As a Zen master said, nothing is left to you at this moment but to have a good laugh. In this moment, the whole quality of consciousness is changed, and I feel myself in a new world in which, however, it is obvious that I have always been living. As soon as I recognize that my voluntary and purposeful action happens spontaneously, by itself, just like breathing, hearing, and feeling, I am no longer caught in the contradiction of trying to be spontaneous. There is no real contradiction, since trying is spontaneity. Seeing this, the compulsive, blocked, and tied-up feeling vanishes. It is just as if I had been absorbed in a tug-of-war between my two hands and had forgotten that both were mine.
Not to force anything. I think that's the best translation. It's often called not doing, not acting, not interfering, but not to force seems to me to hit the nail on the head.